I'm just gonna jump right in if you're ready.
I'm always ready.
Okay, cool. So I just wanted to give you a little more like of a briefing, sort of. Basically, what I'm mainly focusing on is the aftermath of Stonewall from the last day of the riot to now, kind of thing.
Oh,
When I was
I that's my favorite part to talk about.
when I was doing it, when I was like trying to come up with an idea, I was looking at all of the already existing documentaries that are about Stonewall, and a lot of them are what led up to and the during. And so I was really curious about the after.
The
One of
after is the best part.
I know, I was like, it's a mystery, so it must be fabulous.
Did you
So
visit the visit? Wait, have you been to the visitor center yet?
I have, yeah, I went. Um, that's actually how I met Efrain. I went when I was in New York, and I wasn't able to get tickets to like the grand opening, but yeah, I hung out there for like an hour because I was waiting for Efrain to be done in a meeting, and so I just kind of like hung out there and read everything on the walls, and um it was great. It's such like a I've been to a lot of different national monument things, and I this is like one of my favorite visitor centers. It was very
Oh, thank
nice.
you. It's
Um
beautiful here.
I loved it. So
And I
let's
hope
see.
you caught the fact that what I tried to do as one of the curators was make sure that we had a lot of quotes from those people who were around after Stonewall.
Yeah, I like the like wall almost is like a timeline. I love it. It's amazing. So the one thing I was curious about, I mean, I have a couple of questions here,
Sure.
but um so I had when I was like preparing for just my project in general, I actually picked up the Stonewall Reader, and I read a good chunk of it,
It's right
but
over there.
I read a good chunk of it, and I read your excerpt from it. And the thing that I was curious about in the during is like you you moved to New York wanting to find that community, and you had no idea that this crazy thing was going to happen. And so I'm wondering what was going on in your mind when you walked out of the bar, but you decided to stay and you decided to continue on in that fight and in that protest. I mean, you're here now and you're still doing it. And so when you were young, though, and you were in that moment, what was like, okay, I'm going to do it? What was that moment for you?
Well, I don't think anybody expected what would have occurred after the riot. None of us. For me, being a 18-year-old who had just moved to New York 6 weeks before to find my community, within those 6 weeks, I had. Um, when I found Christopher Street, I found friends immediately. And as an 18-year-old, you do what other 18-year-olds do. You, walk up and down the street with and hang out with your friends and talk about, who's going out with who, fashions, politics, whatever. But I also had some friends who were young activists who literally, because of what the community was before Stonewall, had no direction. None of us had direction or knew what to do. But we all had one thing in common, which was we didn't believe in what society thought of us. And we knew that had to change. That was the one thing we all had in common. Uh, Inside the bar that night, June 28th, I had never seen such violence in my life. Again, 6 weeks in New York, I look like the boy next door, from Philadelphia. And I was worried. I was concerned. I was frightened. But getting outside the bar, I think all the years of hostility that were pent up in me, and I think others felt as similar, decided it was time to fight back. It was the height of the counterculture 1960s, and women were fighting back, blacks were fighting back, Latinos were fighting back, and somewhere in my head it was, why not us? Had no idea what that meant at the time. I was 18. Um, and I just got extremely angry, realizing that if the police could do this to us, the people who were supposed to protect us, anybody could. And the reason for that was that the world didn't know who we were. And so about time we did something about that. And for me, I was very lucky that someone I'd met previously, Marty Robinson, came up to me and gave me a piece of chalk and said, "Right on the walls in the street tomorrow night, Stonewall." Um, Probably one of the most important things I've ever done in my life, as I look back at it now. Um, and that, you know, from that came the second night of Stonewall and people speaking from the steps of, I like to call the burnt out Stonewall, which for us to congregate was illegal in itself. Everything we did from that point on for next year was totally illegal at that time, and we didn't care. Our, slogan was out loud and proud. And from Stonewall literally came everything we have today. Everything. I can draw a direct line. And let's agree to one thing. I'm old. I'm 73, and I've been there every single day for 55 years since that night. Um, One of the few remaining, strangely enough. Um, but what was amazing for me and what's most important for me, and we have up on that wall at the visitor center, and I'm very proud of that because up to this point, there have been so many myths about Stonewall, and no one has really told the real story. No one really can tell the whole story because it is a compilation of many stories. It took
Yeah.
place over many hours, over many city blocks. Therefore, no one can know everything. We each can add our contribution and share what we might have done or not done. For me, it was the simple writing on the street. That was, I guess, my little contribution. But from the ashes of Stonewall came Gay Liberation Front. Gay Liberation Front was going to change everything. Uh, what most people don't know is our first demonstration took place 1 month later on June 27th, July 27th, I'm sorry, 1969, where we marched from uh, Washington Square Park to Stonewall. Two things very interesting about that. First thing, it was organized by Marty Robinson and Martha Shelley, a man and a woman, showing that the community was united. Uh, Number two, we knew at that point, 1 month later, that a focal point of homophobia or fighting against the LGBT community was based on Stonewall. That's why we marched to Stonewall. And it was a march, against the police and their intimidation practices against the LGBT community. It was meant to focus light on Kew Garden's Queen and actions the police were taking there. But notice within 1 month it changed and it became Stonewall. So at that point, 1 month later, Stonewall was a focal point. Um, let
I
me,
love that. I didn't know that. That's really cool.
yeah. And there are pictures of that. And uh, when I wrote my memoir, God, 8 years ago now, there were no pictures of me from 69 to 71, which was very sad. And there's a section in the book which has pictures of me afterwards. Since that time, 8 pictures have been found of me, and 2 of them are of that march. So,
Wow.
yeah, I'm very proud of that.
That's
Anyway,
awesome.
yeah, I think so, and it makes me very proud. Uh, so that was our first march. Um, and we started meeting regular. Gay Liberation Front was probably to this day the most dysfunctional organization that ever had existed. In my lifetime, it still is the most dysfunctional. But it was the most magical of LGBT organizations. It did more for this community than any organization since. Let me repeat that. It did more than any other organization in the LGBT community since, for one very good reason. It did 2 things that no one ever did in 2,000 years. First thing it did was allow us to discuss our identities and discuss, you know, how are we between men and women? What's feminism? What's masculinity? How do we define these things? Do we accept each other as gay, lesbian, and label ourselves as we wish to label ourselves? Do we accept the trans community? Um, and more importantly, and the most important thing aside from identifying ourselves and accepting the fact of everyone's identity, that was revolutionary. Up until that point, LGBT organizations refused to do that. We did
Yeah.
that. The second thing we did, which is most important, we realized there was no LGBT community. And we decided to create a community where there was none before. So we set out to do that. We created medical committees that would put out literature on the street about LGBT health. We created legal committees, which told people what their legal rights were and where to go if police arrest them or if they got harassed. We created social organizations. We created the first, social organizations publicly, which were dances and meetings. It was illegal for us to congregate and also illegal for us to advertise in newspapers. Homosexuals were organizing. Please join us. This is where we're going to be. Police could have raided any one of those institutions. We created the first youth organization that actually went out to high schools and spoke and, had a hotline, a suicide hotline or a bully hotline. We put out newsletters, the Gay Youth Committee. We had a trans community organization called Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries. Everything we did that year ended up giving us everything we needed to do. Take a look where we've come from that. First trans organization. That's a major issue in today's world. Youth
Yeah.
organization, Trevor Project, and others now exist to handle those issues. Non-discrimination. We're fighting those 450 bills around the country, and all the training goes back to GLF, which literally had to invent all of those items. It was the first magical year. And if all that were not enough, here's a statistic that will amaze you and why I like what your project is. So in my book, I write, and it's the first time this ever appeared anywhere, and it was, I think, a shock for most of us. Before Stonewall, there were only 100 out activists in the entire nation. After Stonewall, and after that first year, we created the first gay pride. How many showed up? 15,000. That's why it was the first magical year. We created self-identity, we created visibility, and it changed the world.
That's literally amazing. Oh my goodness. That's crazy. I love
Yeah.
that.
And you're correct that most people do not concentrate on that first year and understand its importance. They look at
Yeah.
Stonewall. If you look at Stonewall, on that wall that you read, one of the most important lines that I wrote was those most associated with Stonewall became the founders of Gay Liberation Front. And that spirit gave us everything we have today.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so cool. Oh, that's awesome.
There were people that were young activists, there were drag queens, there were street kids who were part of that evening. But it was the activists who carried the spirit on. And
Yeah.
a lot of people, they were there that night, but where were they the second night? Where were they the third night? Where were they a week later? Where were they a month later? All through
Yeah.
that first year where we created change.
Yeah. That's so cool. What was your plan of action when the protest like died down kind of after those like 4 or 5 days? How did you decide what your next steps were? Like, did you all kind of meet sort of, or like what was going on for you when you woke up and you were like, I just did that. What do I do next?
It actually happened almost organically. We started leafleting the day after, and it just for me, it was leafleting every single day. And we would take our little posters and use wheat paste and put them on poles up and down the street. If there was a need be, we had a demonstration. We demonstrated against media. We demonstrated against the police. There was so much activity that first year. I've never seen so much in my life in uh, uh, one period and by one organization. It was impressive and intense. On top of all the public demonstrations and becoming visible, we also had the internal fights of learning who we were and accepting each other, and trying to evolve into a community that embraced diversity. Up until that point, those 100 activists, they only had one demonstration a year. And that one demonstration, men had to wear suits and ties and women had to wear dresses. That's
Yeah.
not who we were. Um, we wanted to be accepted on our terms as we were. Um, and that's what we set out to do. I mean, everything we did was revolutionary. Everything we did was new. We invented I guess, the gay activist movement that existed from that point on. There had never been anything like it before. No one ever did disruptions. No one ever challenged newspapers. Um,
Yeah.
and you see the difference between before Stonewall and after. Um, uh, it's extremely drastic because before Stonewall, activists wanted to assimilate. We didn't give a fuck about assimilating. We were
Yeah.
telling people, "You're going to accept us as we are. Get over it, and we're going to be in your face."
That's amazing. How the queer culture has changed, kind of like timeline wise. Obviously, New York Pride is the biggest party in the world, and it's crazy. And it all began because of Stonewall and everything that happened. And, but like specific things in how like the queer culture has changed and altered, are there things that you've noticed?
That's a huge question. And actually, it's more than one question. So,
Yeah.
uh, for I guess the first question is, um, over 55 years for me, how has pride changed? Well, pride is one of the most important things that we have done because it is involved and changed the world. How has it changed the world? First Pride had 15,000 people. Second year, it had tens of thousands. Third year, it had hundreds of thousands. If you look around the world today, you will find Pride in practically every part of the world, and there are millions who celebrate it.
Yeah.
So that alone changed the world. Um, and pride is still used depending on what part of the world you were in for its purpose. For our purpose, that first year, it was visibility. We were leaving Greenwich Village and walking entirely across Manhattan to Central Park. That's basically 8th Street to 57th Street. And we were clearing, you're going to see us. We're going to be in your face. So, um, uh, the time for silence about us had ended. You will no longer have the pleasure of our silence. You will see us. We will be in your face. Get used to us, and we will demand every right that we want. We will have equal rights. Period. End of subject. Uh, so that was a major change. That is still used by some places. So, for instance, the best example I could give you is Istanbul, Turkey, where they refuse to allow them to have pride, but they still do it. It's still a protest march, and they pop up in one part, and the police go after them. Then they pop up another place, and the police go. It's like whack-a-mole. It's my favorite pride, and someday I hope to go there and take part in that. And if I get arrested again, what's one more arrest?
What's
Uh,
one more?
yeah. Um, But the most impressive thing about Pride, and which shows an incredible change for me, is a lot of the Western countries, meaning France, England, United States, on during June, throughout the world, their embassies fly a rainbow flag. Now, there are countries in the world where if you are gay, you could be arrested. For
Yeah.
them to have a chance to walk by an embassy and see a rainbow flag gives them hope.
Yeah.
So I like to say that pride is probably our best export from the LGBT community to the world.
Yeah, I agree. Pride's awesome. Um, let's see. Do you feel that the Stonewall Uprising was necessary in launching New York City Pride to where it is today? If not Stonewall, what else? Something had to be the catalyst.
Well, Stonewall was the catalyst, and it happened at a time of the height of the 1960s counter-revolutionary movement. We
Right.
just decided to join it at that night. All the elements were correct. Primarily, what it was is people, young people of my age group at that time, were rebelling, and this was the police raiding that bar gave us the final reason to rebel. It's as simple as that. There's no magic sauce somewhere else.
Yeah.
There were over 100 riots during the 1960s. They were caused by the Vietnam War for against racism. Um, this was our riot. We were just one part of a mass movement to change America.
Yeah.
Uh, and it was violent. It was typically of every other riot. It wasn't a Busby Berkeley musical. Some people try to make it out, or a Hollywood musical, I could say. People
Yeah.
got hurt. But from that, it changed the world. There was no other event like it. Before it, there was Compton riot in San Francisco and Black Cat in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
but they didn't seem to catch the spirit. I think the reason for this was it was the height of 19 of the revolution. It was the last year of the cattle revolution, as I
Right.
see it in America, and everybody was participating but the gay community.
Yeah.
And
They needed to participate.
yeah,
That's
and
awesome.
yeah, and I think there were at that point people like me who grew up seeing that counterculture develop and seeing other communities fighting back against oppression. I felt the anger in me, and I felt I had to fight back, and that was the catalyst for it. Those police coming into that bar.
Right. As someone who grew up in Philadelphia, how have you noticed that city or other cities following suit in New York City's progression of pride? Is New York City the poster child for pride?
No, Philadelphia is the poster child for pride. Now I say that, um, I during my speech before the president, I got to say, by the way, it was the first speech that I ever got to say, Mr. President, Dr. Biden, as starting a speech, which was sort of amazing to say that on that ground 55 years ago,
It's
where
crazy.
things weren't happening so official. Yeah, it was a moment to really ponder that. But
Yeah.
the reality is, I'm sorry, what was the question? I just got lost in that one
No,
moment.
it's fine. As someone who grew up in Philadelphia, how have you
Ah,
noticed?
great.
Okay.
Um, so I'm going to use myself as an example here, if I can.
Yeah.
Uh, from Stonewall, I went to Gay Liberation Front. Gay Liberation Front taught me all that I had to know about leadership, organization. Uh, in fact, it taught me to create my own organization within GLF called Gay Youth, which
Yeah.
was the first national gay youth organization to fight bullying, to have a hotline for suicide, to create social functions, to have regular meetings so young gay people had a place to go and a community to embrace them. That's what that
Yeah.
was all about. When I left New York in 1971, I came back to Philadelphia. And at one point, I finally decided the word that represented everything to me and been my life motto for what I think of the LGBT movement is visibility. I believe that us being visible takes us out of that closet of being the green-eyed monster that people don't know. So I want visibility for all of us. And I didn't think the movement was going fast enough. So that caused me to do TV disruptions on live TV. And I did them from 1972 through 1973. And the most noted of them is the CBS Evening News with a man by the name of Walter Cronkite. He was you have to realize that at that time there was no internet, no cell phones. So if you
Right.
wanted your news, you got it from TV news or your morning paper. And TV networks were the prime media at that time. And Walter Cronkite was the main place people got their news. That night that I disrupted his show, 60 million people were watching.
He's
So for the first time, many people saw a gay person in a
yeah.
way they'd never expected a gay person to be.
Right.
Charging at what they assumed was their anchor, sitting between that anchor and the camera and holding a sign into the camera and screaming, "Gays protest CBS prejudice." Well, that was pretty heavy. And the next morning, that appeared in the front paper page of practically every newspaper in America. So all of a sudden, people had to start discussing us. They might have hated me for doing what I did, but guess what? They had to discuss the subject. And from that, something else happened. I started getting invited on talk shows to talk about people like me. That had never happened before. All of a
Yeah.
sudden, millions of people are seeing LGBT people popping up. And probably for a nanosecond, I became the most famous LGBT person in America. And from that nanosecond, I thought I could do almost anything. So I wrote the governor of Pennsylvania and I said, hey, I'd like to get together and talk about the problems of gay men and lesbian women in Pennsylvania. And he agreed to the meeting. No other governor had ever met with someone from the LGBT community. So that transformed us from a radical movement starting to go in the political movement. When I met with him, uh, I was told by his secretary that it was a private meeting and couldn't be talked about. And so
Right.
we went into the meeting, and he said, what could I do? I said, well, you could issue an executive order banning discrimination against my community. You could create a commission to look in to, the problems we have. And I asked for everything, basically. Um, and on the way out, uh, as they opened the doors, all of a sudden there were all these flashes. What I didn't know is, and the surprise to me was, that the governor asked his press secretary to call in the entire state press pool to photograph us leaving that office because he realized it was history while I didn't. And there's a photo of that, AP photo that still exists, where you see him slapping me on the back and talking to me. And what he says to me is, by the way, I caught you on the Cronkite show.
Oh my gosh.
Stonewall led to GLF. GLF led to the disruptions. The disruptions led to the office of the governor. That governor issued the world's first non-discrimination law, executive order, which stated you could not discriminate against gay men and lesbian women in state government. That had never been done before. That governor created a commission called the Governor's Commission on Sexual Minorities. That governor issued a gay pride resolution. That governor created liaisons from government to the gay community. So therefore, every LGBT commission appointed by a governor, a mayor, or the president of the United States, or every LGBT appointed political figure in America stands on the shoulders of Governor Milton Schaap. And that all happened here in Pennsylvania. So more work got done here than got done in the.
New York gets all of the credit.
Of course it does. It's New York, is the center of New York.
That's
So
really cool.
that was that was a major change. All across the country, people started doing similar, but it was invented there, and thanks to Governor Milton Schaap.
Yeah.
Um, and so from there, I did other things. I became part of what is a local LGBT media by creating Philadelphia Gay News, and which is still around today, and I'm still publisher 48 years later. Um, and so much more. And again, it all can be traced to Stonewall, and Gay Liberation Front.
Yeah.
Those two things connected with pride. Now, if you ask a further question, one of the things we're doing at the Visitor Center is correcting some of the myths about Stonewall and also giving credit to the people who deserve some credit. I like to say that most people in our community, if I would ask them who was at Stonewall, they might be able to give me one or two names. By the time you leave that building, if you read the wall, you will know at least 20 names.
Yeah.
So we're having an opportunity for people to really look at our history.
Yeah. That's really cool. And I love in the visitor center how visual it is, but there's also like it it helps people who learn different ways, and they everyone that goes there learns something because there's videos and there's words and there's pictures and there's everything. And so I love like how like visceral it is.
Did you write in the Parsons books? Oh,
No, but I flipped through some of them, but I didn't write in them. I do know what you're talking about though. I did watch the interview with Adam though, which was cool.
oh yeah.
Um
Uh, I had been involved with building that for 2 years. And my contribution is the wall.
yeah.
Um, and I am still amazed at what has been created. And it took, I can't say this enough. It took two women of color to envision this and make it a reality. And that's Diane Rodriguez, and Anne Marie Gothard. And they amaze me to this day.
That's really cool. Um let's see. Okay. Have you felt safer over the years? How has your mentality changed walking around with your husband or alone? Was there a time that you didn't feel safe walking and holding hands with a partner, and how has that changed? And secondly, are there places you have visited even today where your comfort level is different?
Another big question. It takes him 55 years, and that has it changed? Um, well, when I realized who I was, it wasn't just sex that was the difference. For
Yeah,
me, I realized it was emotion, and I always wanted to be in love. I actually, sort of like envisioned the, picket American picket fence house with, me and my husband living together, which was very unusual in the 1960s as I was growing up. But that's what being gay meant to me, falling in love. Um, and therefore, holding hands with someone, unless I was in love with them, wasn't really that important. Um, uh, I've been together with my husband now for 20 years. I love holding his hand. And there's almost any place I feel comfortable doing so, with the exception of when we travel and we are countries where the culture would not allow it for many reasons. And I also don't want to be the person that forces that gay community in that country to come to terms with something like that.
yeah,
That's not polite.
yeah.
Each person, each community has to create its community and its form of what is being out, which is another question which we haven't gone over, which is, our point was in 1969, if every LGBT person in the world was out, there'd be no need for a gay rights movement because they would see all of us, again, visibility, and they would
Yes,
realize that they have relatives, co-workers, and friends who are gay, and the world would change overnight. Well, that's not happened. And here we are, 2024, and it still hasn't happened and probably will never will, for the simple reason that there are people, for their own personal reasons, cannot come out. And coming out is something that's very personal to people. And they do it at their own level. We have no right to tell people that they have to come out. It's a personal decision.
it's
But
scary as hell too.
and that's what we all have in common. it's the one thing we all have in common is the fact that we had to go through that, if we go through that. Um, and it's frightening. It was frightening to me when I told my parents, and I was in the middle of all this, and it still was frightening. Probably that was more frightening to me than being in Stonewall or doing a disruption because
Yeah.
it's personal.
I can't wait for the day where people have to come out as straight.
Well, I don't know if that will ever happen, but
I know, but it'd be funny. Okay, let's see. Um, what is something you did while protesting that you are most proud of or will never forget the details of? And what is something you witnessed someone else doing for the cause that made you feel proud?
there's so many. I mean, uh,
I mean, you were
I guess
saying that the chalk was your big thing.
there are so many things in my life that um, help me progress, and I hope help the community progress. Um, the chalk was me really coming out and saying, "This is what I'm doing the rest of my life." That's what that
Yeah.
did. Um, the TV disruption was okay, not only visibility, but I'm going to go by my gut because literally 99.9% of my community hated me for doing that. And I was alone, very alone in what I thought was right. Um, and because of that, we have Will and Grace and Ellen and LGBT anchors on TV today. Um, but that helped set that in motion. So I'm very proud of that. I'm proud of what I did with Governor Shapp. I mean, there's so many parts of my life um, that I feel um, changed me, and I hope added to what we were doing. Um, and all of them basically were things that I was inventing, or where people gave me ideas on, and we expanded upon it. Uh, what am I most proud about other people? I think the one that stands out for me is one that most people don't know the individual who did it. Um, and it was Leonard Matlovich. Leonard Matlovich was one of the most decorated members of the military in Vietnam. And he decided on his own that he wanted to come out. And he did so. Um, and that led to the campaign for LGBT people in the military. But when he did that, that was really brave. And he was such a nice guy. I mean, he really was. Um, so I think that was probably brave. I don't think for me, being doing some of the things I did, filing a lawsuit to me is okay, it's fine. But putting your body and your life online is something different.
Yeah.
And much of the last 10 years has been file a lawsuit or, you know, do legislation. Um, you know, I think we're at a point now with 450 pieces of legislation uh, against the LGBT community around the country that people better get back to our roots and be creative and start doing action rather than sitting on the couch and just typing something on social media. That's not being an activist.
Yeah, I agree completely. Yeah. Um,
I mean, I think in some ways we've lost our way and people don't know what uh, and who we are and what our tools are.
yeah.
This past Pride, there were some people who tried to interrupt Pride and saying you can't have Pride during genocide. Well, you dishonor your own community, yourself, and your history by not understanding it. The one tool we have is visibility. It's one thing that created you, the community, that gives you the right to be out, the privilege to be out. You didn't have that privilege, and that privilege was given to you by that pride. How dare you try to do that? How dare you try to do that? Because when you do that, you're taking away the pride from other young people who might go to that pride and come out for the first time. How dare you?
Yeah. It's such a it's such
Shame
a
on you.
it's such like a crazy like pride it's like the safest like little bubble that you can be in as like a young queer person. It's crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's what it was
It's so
meant.
important.
Yeah. And if you do that, you don't understand community. And I think there has to be a little self-hate in yourself.
Yeah. And like,
And by the way, you might be, interested in another movement for something, but that's fine. And I don't care what position you are on Gaza, you don't stop pride. We won't allow you to do that.
and people were doing both in the parade. There were free Gaza flags, and it was it was a double movement. It was very cool.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
you can march in pride and have almost any banner you want, unless it's homophobic, anti-Semitic, anti-Islam, whatever.
yeah.
You could support whatever political side of any issue you want to, support. Um, and that's fine. And that goes back to the first Pride, where we decided to accept all people. There was a big discussion. One of the largest discussions we had on the first Pride was, should we allow LGBT religious groups to participate? Because religion had been the one organization that for 2,000 years has oppressed us. And we finally decided, if it was an LGBT organization, religion, that supported our rights, and believed in taking pride in our community and what we'd achieved, they had a right to march with us.
Yeah.
So pride is for everyone who takes pride in themselves and the community we've created. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. I agree. What's the biggest change from the first Pride in 1970 to the most recent Pride? Obviously, the number of people has continued to increase, but is there anything radically different that stands out?
Well, there's always this debate of whether or not we should allow corporations to be part of it, um, or whether we should allow military and police to be part of it. Uh, well, in 1970, at the first Pride, we didn't have those choices. No corporation in America wanted to be part of us. No military, I mean, police wanted to stop us.
Yeah.
So that's sort of a change. Um, so how do we look at that today? And you can only look at it from the prism of today. And so if I look at that and compare it to 1969, I look back and I remember those religious organizations, which we debated whether they should be allowed in. So for me, I believe corporations should be allowed in with some restrictions for two reasons. Number one, I want the world to see that various corporations support us. I also want the employees of that corporation to know that they have a right to be themselves working in that corporation. And I want that corporation to know it has LGBT employees that they
Yeah.
have to encourage to be themselves.
Yeah. I love that. So I have one last question for you. It's kind of it's it's the last but very not least question, if you will. As a queer female in today's political climate, do you have any advice for me and my generation?
Yes, be very, very visible. And uh, let's be a little political here, can we? So you said queer, correct? Yeah. Does that mean you're a lesbian?
Kinda.
I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable.
No, it's okay. It's just a loaded question.
I agree, it's loaded. All right, let's put it this way. In your past, you find yourself much attracted to women.
Yes.
Okay. In my estimation, okay, language is really important. Um, and some people have used the word queer in a political context where you can be queer but not gay or lesbian, which to me
Right,
takes away our visibility.
right.
And that concerns me. So that's why I asked that question. So what can you do as an individual? Be as visible as you can. And if you want to describe yourself as queer, I respect that. Um, that's what we learned in 1969 was to respect each other and whatever term they wish to use for themselves. And that disappeared for quite a long while, which offended me. And so therefore I respect the term, but when you talk about the political consequences of being that, to me, I would hope you talk about loving women so they understand what that actually means. I mean, I feel strongly about that because I could tell you that in my city, there was a lesbian woman running for city council, and there was another woman running against her who said she was queer. And guess what? She married a man, she was living with a man, um, and that's not visibility.
Yeah.
I mean, that just says to everybody, oh, she's just heterosexual with a new title.
Yeah.
And she was running against a lesbian who would have become the first out person in that council. And therefore, by saying the other woman, by saying she was queer, that took away from that campaign. Uh,
Yeah.
therefore, queer was used against us.
Yeah. That's a really like cool way of thinking about it. I never thought about it like that.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Well, I'm old. That's why I think like
No, it makes total sense though.
I'm old.
I'm glad that you think about it like that because it's it makes more sense than anything else, to be honest. What about
I
just
see
the
many.
what were you gonna say?
I mean, you could describe yourself as a gay woman, um, or other things, but I mean, you have to be comfortable with how you describe yourself.
Yeah,
And that's your choice, not mine. But I know a lot of the older um, women in our community describe themselves as gay women
right.
because they want to be visible, and that's the way for them to do that. Um, it's a debate that we're going to continue to have, I think. I don't think it's been resolved. I think by your generation, it has. Um, but by older generations, we see the pearls in it.
And then just like what for my generation in general, for the younger people, um, do you have any advice for like because we talked about already actually doing action and not just sitting on your couch and writing up a lawsuit. Do you have any advice for creating that and starting that for the young people?
Well, the first thing you have, which is really wonderful, is um, it used to be that when you came out, you thought you were alone. I did in Philadelphia, the city of 1.6, why I moved million. That's why I moved to New York. But today you go on the internet and you find a gazillion organizations. So the first thing you do when you come out is to learn there's a community out there ready to embrace you. And you should contact them and get involved with them. And if you feel like you want to be part of growing a community, then you join an organization and work to help that organization, like the Trevor Project or whatever subject matter you want to get involved. There are gay legal organizations, there are gay medical organizations. I mean, you could be almost anywhere on the spectrum of any profession. Gay teachers, I mean, you can find an organization that will embrace you and the profession you would like to be part. You can volunteer to be part of that, but just sitting and typing isn't a thing. And if you want to really make change, you do what we did. Be inventive, be creative. I mean, I did chain ins, I did neck braces around doors. I chained myself to the Liberty Bell at one point, um, disrupted TV shows, got arrested at police stations. It was being out loud and proud and in people's faces where it needed to be. If I were in a state where um, people were trying to take away my rights, I'd be fighting those legislators who did that. I'd be chaining myself to the door of their offices. I'd be trying to maybe chain myself to them. Um, I think you need to be creative and bring attention to how discriminatory they are being. Uh, I mean, I think it's overlooked often what those 450 pieces of legislation are trying to do. And I think you show that it best when you point to the one in Florida, which is the so-called Don't Say Gay bill. Well, if you're not allowed to say gay, what is that doing to you? It's making you invisible again. What did we fight for? Visibility.
Visibility. That's so
This
cool.
is all very logical. And I think
Yeah,
people spend too much time debating things on the web and social media that rather than just be logical about it and take action, they sit and discuss or they file a lawsuit. I mean, lawsuits take time. I think it's time with the backlash going on that we begin to take action. We took action in every single backlash in the past, and there have been many backlashes. This is no different than other backlashes. And we will be better at the end of this backlash. We have at all other backlashes, as long as we as a community stay visible.
yeah,
Well, do me a favor and thank the people back at the visitor center who put us together.
I
Write them a little
will.
note. You did this um, because I love those people and they need to know what they're doing is good.
I know. I was gonna, once I'm done with everything, I was gonna send the final cut to you and Ephraim.
Yeah, that'd be great. Anyway, have yourself a great week, okay?
Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. It was so nice to meet you and talk to
And
you.
believe me, you gave something back to me. It is so nice to see people of your generation wanting to know history and wanting to get involved to make change. So you made me realize what we did back there is everlasting. So
It
thank you for
definitely
that.
is. Thank you
Thank
so much, Mark. Have
Have
a
a great
great
week.
day. Bye.